This will be a question and answer session. So we have some questions unanswered from the last meeting. So we'll start with that. So the first question we have is from Patrick. About 6 months ago, I started watching some of your recorded satsangs on YouTube and quickly resonated with what you were saying about ego rising and self-attentiveness, etc. I went to India in 2016, where I met Sri Ramakant Maharaj and received the Nam mantra. He says the following about that mantra: meditation is needed at the initial stage. The spirit is very sensitive. So when it is hammered with I am Brahman, Brahman I am, over and over, again and again, a purification process takes place. You are hammering the ego and saying you are a liar. You are not male or female. You are Brahman. This is how the Nam mantra works. Bhagavan's writings and your explanations of them have cleared up a lot of fuzzy area that I had. Sri Ramakant's guru, Nisargadatta, also has influenced me for years, but there were a lot of internal contradictions that threw me off for quite some time. Is Sri Ramakant's understanding of how this mantra works sound? Does revealing the ego in this manner have any spiritual benefit? Since I did it for years, I would like to believe that there was some profit in it. Is meditation needed at the initial stage? Is it how is it now necessary because of how scatterbrained we are in this crazy information age of flashing lights and fragmenting videos? I am not trying to totally discredit Sri Ramakant or Nisargadatta, both of whom I learned a great deal and profited from. I just want some clarity on Sri Ramakant's take on the Nam mantra. That is the first question.
Uh, okay. Um, First, it seems a bit strange, but it is referred to as Nam mantra. Nam means name. Usually, a Nama mantra is a name of God. Whereas I am Brahman is it's a mantra. Well, it's not intended as a mantra. It can be used as a mantra, but it's not quite a name of God. Um, Regarding the efficacy of repeating I am Brahman, that is this this is I am Brahman is one of the four Mahavakyas. In the Upanishads, the Mahavakyas are great sayings. There's one Mahavakya in each of the four Vedas. And the various Upanishads, each Upanishad is attached to a particular Veda. So in one Upadesha, from each of the four Vedas, there is a Mahavakya. A Mahavakya, sometimes the term Mahavakya means a great saying. Sometimes it's used in a more broad sense, but in the precise sense referring to the four Mahavakyas, they are statements revealing Jiva Brahmaikya. That is the oneness of Jiva and Brahman. But Jiva is nothing other than Brahman. The four Mahavakyas are the most often referred to Mahavakya, that they all have essentially the same meaning, but the one which is most often referred to is Tattvamasi, you are that, or that you are. There, that refers to Brahman. The other three are Aham Brahmasmi, which means I am Brahman. I am Atma Brahman. This self is Brahman. This self referring to ourself, ourself. We are self of Brahman, in other words. And Prajnanam Brahman. Prajnanam means awareness. In this context, it means pure awareness. So pure awareness is Brahman. That pure awareness is what is shining in each one of us as I, our essential being. So what is the purpose of these four Mahavakyas? That is the first thing we need to understand. That is, when we write, our real nature, as Bhagavan made clear, is infinite happiness. But when we rise as ego, we limit ourselves to the extent of a body, as Bhagavan says. That is, this body is limited in space. Obviously, it's only occupying a very small uh, area in space or volume in space. It's also limited in time. It's born one day, it's going to die another day. It's limited in both time and space. It's also limited. There's said to be three fundamental types of limitation: limitations in time, limitations in space, and what is called limitation in vastu. Vastu in this context means thing or object. That is, each object is distinct from each other object. So in that way, it is limited. That is, if I'm this body, I'm not this table, and I'm not this microphone or this PC or any other thing. So we limit ourselves in so many ways by rising as ego, because as soon as we rise as ego, we project and identify ourselves as a body. So because we limit ourselves, we cannot experience the infinite happiness that is our own real nature. That is, we mistake ourselves to be something other than what we actually are. What we actually are is infinite Satchidananda, infinite being, infinite awareness, infinite happiness. But now, by raising as ego, we seemingly limit ourselves. Because we limit ourselves, we are not able to experience the infinite happiness that we actually are. So, since infinite happiness is our real nature, by limiting ourselves, we we naturally feel a dissatisfaction, and nothing will satisfy us other than the infinite happiness that we actually are. But because we seem to be lacking that infinite happiness, though we're never actually lacking it, it's always our real nature. Infinite happiness is what we actually are. But because we mistake ourselves to be something else, we seem to lack that happiness. So there seems to be a deficiency in ourself. We seem to be lacking in happiness. So since the happiness seems to be lacking in ourself, we naturally look for it outside ourselves. So we get likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. We think if I have this, I'll be happy. If I have that, I'll be happy. So we're always looking for happiness, for satisfaction outside ourselves. And when uh, we first seek happiness in material things, but when we are frustrated and find that however much we accumulate material things, they never satisfy us. They're all transient. And even if we gain something that we think will give us happiness, we're happy at the moment we gain it, but very quickly we find it's not giving us the happiness that we were expecting. So we become dissatisfied. We want something else. We want something else. So the nature of the mind is pravritti. Pravritti means going outward, seeking happiness outside itself. So so long as we seek that happiness outside ourselves, we will never be satisfied. So as I say, first we start seeking happiness in material things. When we are not satisfied by material things, we begin to think that happiness must be in something other than these material things. So we are drawn to some form of spiritual path, looking for some happiness in some other way. We take, for example, most religions are theistic religions. They're based on a belief in God. And we think that God is the source of happiness. So if we can somehow get the grace of God, then we'll be happy. Or even religions that aren't specifically theistic, they believe in karma. But according to whatever karma you do, you have to experience the fruit of that karma. So, but obviously karmas are finite, so the fruit of karmas are finite. So that doesn't give infinite happiness. So they seek happiness by going beyond karma. So very generally, if we are drawn to the spiritual path, we're seeking happiness in something other than material things, but we're still seeking it outside ourselves. This is where the Mahavakyas come in. What we are seeking, whether we call it God or happiness or true knowledge or peace or satisfaction or whatever, we are seeking it outside ourselves. So the Mahavakyas tell us that what we are seeking is not something outside ourselves, it is ourself. You are that. You are Brahman. That is Brahman. What is Brahman? Brahman means the definition given in the Upanishads. Well, there are several definitions. One is ekam eva advaityam, one only without a second. Another is satyam jnanam anantam. Satyam means what is real, in other words, being. Jnanam means awareness. Anantam means infinite. So infinite being awareness is what is Brahman, and that is what we actually are. So the aim of those Mahavakyas is to turn our attention back within, turn us to stop us looking for things outside ourselves and to seek that happiness in ourselves. If we understand not just the meaning of the words aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman, if we understand the implication of that, if I am Brahman, then there's no Brahman other than me. If I want to attain Brahman, who is infinite happiness, I need to know myself as I actually am. So the aim of the Mahavakyas is to stop us from seeking that happiness outside and to seek the happiness within. If we understand this purpose, we will then seek that happiness within ourselves. If we go on repeating, I am Brahman, we haven't really understood either the meaning or the implication of this saying. Because we can't become Brahman just by thinking I am Brahman. So long as we rise as ego, we have seemingly separated ourselves from the infinite whole that we actually are. Of course, we can never separate ourselves from the infinite whole because the infinite is that other than which there is nothing. That is, infinite by definition has to be one only without a second. Because if there were any second thing, anything other than the infinite would thereby be limited, and it would therefore not be infinite, it would be finite. So nothing can be other than the infinite. So the infinite is what we actually are. So to know the infinite, we have to know ourselves. But so long as we rise as ego, when we talk about Brahman or talk about infinite or talk about God or whatever, we are just talking about an idea. That is, for us, Brahman is just an idea. God is just an idea. The infinite is just an idea because we don't experience it as ourself. In order to know Brahman as it is, we need to know it as ourself. And in order to know it as ourself, we need to know what we actually are. So merely thinking I am Brahman, we cannot thereby become Brahman. There are various analogies that are given in the Upanishads and Puranas and so on. One analogy is given of a newborn prince. When shortly after the prince was born, there was his father's kingdom was taken over by a minister. The minister had a coup and took over control of the kingdom. And he killed the king and queen, but some loyal ministers smuggled the baby out into the forest and entrusted the baby to the care of a woodcutter in the forest. So that boy grew up believing that he was the son of a woodcutter. After many years, when the ministers knew that he would now be he would now be a grown man. He would now be maybe 20 years old or so. So they came there to tell him, but he is the prince. He's the rightful heir of the kingdom. That prince will not, cannot become the, cannot reclaim his father's kingdom simply by sitting in the forest and saying, I am a prince, I am a prince, I am the rightful king of this kingdom. In order to regain the kingdom, he needs to work at it. He needs to follow the advice of the ministers. He needs to forge alliances with the influential people in the kingdom. He needs to raise an army to support him, and then only can he reclaim the kingdom. Likewise, having been told we are Brahman, simply sitting there saying, I am Brahman, I am Brahman, it's not going to, we're not going to become Brahman. We need to, what are the obstacles to us experiencing ourselves as Brahman? Just like that prince, there were obstacles facing his reclaiming his kingdom because his kingdom had been usurped by some corrupt ministers or generals or whatever. So he had to work to reclaim it. Likewise, we have to work to reclaim our real state as Brahman. What are the impediments? The impediments are the impurities in our mind. Those impurities are nothing but the Vishaya vasanas, our inclination to seek happiness in things other than ourselves. Even if we are, when we meditate, I am Brahman, we're meditating on an idea. That idea is something other than ourselves. That is, before we are told you are Brahman, we had no idea that we are Brahman. But then once we are told we are Brahman, we think, oh, I am Brahman. So it's a mere idea that we are Brahman. We need to, but that by meditating on the idea I am Brahman, we're not going to become Brahman because we're meditating on something other than ourselves. In order to know ourselves as we actually are, what do we need to meditate on? We need to meditate on ourselves, not on an idea about ourselves, because now we have the wrong impression, I am this body. So the I that is now aware of itself as I am this body begins to meditate, I am Brahman. It's just adding more confusion. What we need is to remove this false identification. And this false identification can be removed only by correct awareness of ourself as we actually are. For that, we need to investigate ourselves. So it is these Mahavakyas, they serve a purpose but the purpose they are intended to serve is to turn our attention away from looking for happiness or God or Brahman or anything else outside ourselves, to look for it within ourselves. In other words, to investigate ourselves to see what we actually are. So Bhagavan has expressed this very beautifully in verse 32 of Uladunapadu. What he says in this verse is, I'll just briefly read the Tamil and then I'll give the English translation. Aduni endru ammarigal artidavum Tanne edu endru tan tendu iradu adunan idu andru endru ennal uranin mayinal endrum aduve tanai amavadal. What that means is, when the Vedas proclaim that is you, instead of oneself being, knowing oneself as what, thinking I am that, not this, is due to non-existence of strength, because that alone is always seated as oneself. So what does this imply? What Bhagavan implies here is, when we are told you are that, what should our response be? Instead of going on thinking I am that, we should, oh, if I am that, then what am I? That here refers to Brahman. So if I am Brahman, what am I? We need to investigate ourselves. We cannot know Brahman by. Brahman is just an idea until we actually experience it as ourself. So in order to know what Brahman is, we need to know what we are. So we need to investigate ourselves. That's why he said, instead of oneself being, that is, by okay, I'll leave the being bit for a moment. Let's take the knowing bit. That is, instead of knowing oneself as what means, instead of investigating ourselves and knowing what we actually are, thinking I am that, not this, is due to non-existence of strength. When we investigate ourselves, turn our attention within to find out what we actually are, we as ego thereby subside and remain in the state of just being. That's why he says, tendu iradu. Iradu means not being, or instead of being. So instead of being as we actually are, by knowing ourselves as we actually are, merely thinking I am that, not this, is due to non-existence of strength. When he says non-existence of strength, what is the strength he's referring to? It can be explained in various ways, but primarily it's the strength of intellect. That is, when we are told you are that, if we have a sharp and clear understanding, a sharp and clear intellect, we will understand that in order to know that, all I need to do is to know myself. If I am that, there's no use going looking for that outside myself. I need to know myself. So if we've got the strength of the clarity of understanding, that strength is referring firstly to the clarity of understanding. First, we need to understand what is the intention of the Mahavakya. The intention of the Mahavakya is to divert our attention, which is looking for happiness or God or Brahman or whatever it is outside ourselves, to look instead within ourselves. Look at ourselves to see what we ourselves actually are. Because if we are Brahman, to know Brahman, all we need to do is to know ourselves. So, firstly, it's that. So, if we go on thinking, I am that, not this. When he says, I am that, not this, that means I am that Brahman, not this body, this person I take myself to be. So, when he talks of the non-existence of strength, firstly, it's the non-existence, the absence of the strength of understanding. We don't have a clear understanding. That is, we understand the surface meaning of the words without understanding the intention and the implication of those words. It's also due to, the lack of clarity of understanding is because of lack of purity of mind. Because if our minds are very clouded with desires for things other than ourselves, we won't have the clarity to understand subtle truths. So we'll understand the surface meaning of the words without understanding the underlying implication and underlying intention behind the words. And because of that impurity of mind, we will, instead of seeking that happiness within ourselves, which is the intention of the Mahavakya, we'll seek it in a mere thought, I am that. I am. If we meditate, I am Brahman, we merely meditate on an idea, because we don't know what Brahman is. We can't know what Brahman is without knowing ourselves. So we merely meditating on an idea. Meditating on an idea is something other than ourselves. So we're still looking in the wrong direction. Instead of meditating on any idea, we should investigate, what am I? Who am I? That is, we should turn our attention back within to see ourselves. Because the Mahavakya, when the Mahavakya says you are that, that implies that, namely Brahman, is always ourself. Brahman is never anything other than ourself. We are never anything other than Brahman. So to know, we cannot know Brahman as an idea. We can only know Brahman as ourself. So in order to know Brahman as ourself, we need to know ourselves. We need to investigate ourselves and thereby subside back into our natural state of being. So here in this verse, Bhagavan says that thinking I am that, not this, is due to non-existence of strength. Uran in May. In May means non-existence. Uran means strength. So it's the strength of clarity of understanding, the strength of that results from the purity of mind and the one-pointed determination to investigate and know what we actually are. And that is, it's very easy to meditate on an idea like I am Brahman, because by meditating on anything other than ourself, we are thereby nourishing and sustaining ego. The food on which ego lives is attention to things other than ourself. As Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, ego is a formless demon. It's formless because it's got no form of its own. Something that has no form has no separate existence. We distinguish one thing from another thing because of their form. Form isn't here referring just to the physical form, but anything that is in any way distinct from any other thing is a form. So thoughts are forms, feelings are forms, perceptions are forms, memory, all phenomena are forms of one kind or another. So, but ego is not it has no form of its own. So it's got no separate existence of its own. So it gains a seemingly separate existence only when it grasps and identifies itself with a form. So he begins the verse by saying, Urupatri undam, grasping form, it comes into existence. Urupatri nikam, grasping form, it stands. Urupatri undu mika ongam, grasping and feeding on forms, it grows or flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. So the very nature of ego is grasping form. Since ego itself is formless, whatever forms it grasps are things other than itself. And how does it grasp those things? It grasps in its awareness. That is, it hasn't got arms or legs to hands to grasp anything. Grasping there means attending to and being aware of. So the first form we grasp is the form of a body. Not just the physical form of a body, because as Bhagavan clarified earlier in verse 5 of Uludunapadu, Udul Panchakosa Uru, the body is a form of 5 sheaths. Therefore, all 5 are included in the term body. So when he says, when he talks about identifying with the body, he means identifying not just with the physical form of the body, but with all the 5 sheaths. Because we never experience any of the 5 sheaths in isolation from the others. That is what any body that we experience as I, we never experience a dead body as I. It's always a living body. So the life in the body is what is called prana or pranamaya kosha. So there's the annamaya kosha, the physical form of the body. There's the life that animates it. And we also never experience a sleeping body as I. Whatever body we experience as I seems to be awake. Even the dream body seems to be a waking body so long as we're dreaming. So because it's seemingly it's in the state of waking, there's a mind, an intellect, and a will operating within it. So these 5, the physical form of the body, the life that animates it, and the mind, intellect, and will that operate within it, these are called the 5 sheaths. And these are what we collectively identify as I when we rise as ego. So ego depends for its very existence on attending to things other than itself. So if we, as he says in the third sentence, urupatri undu mika ongum. Urupatri means grasping form. Undu means feeding. Mika ongum means it greatly greatly grows or flourishes. So the food that nourishes ego is attention to things other than ourself. So the thought I am Brahman is something other than ourself. We most of the time we exist perfectly happily without the thought I am Brahman. So the thought I am Brahman is something other than ourself. When the Vedas have told us you are that, why should we be thinking of something other than ourselves? Why should we be meditating on the thought I am that instead of meditating on ourself alone? Because if we are that, the logical implication is that we should meditate on ourself alone and know what we are, not merely meditate on a thought, I am that. This is why Bhagavan says it is due to non-existence of strength. This is verse 32. However, there are two verses in Ulladu in which Bhagavan concedes that it is in some way an aid. And it's a rather roundabout aid, but it is in some way an aid. So in verse 29, for example, in verse 29, he defines what is vichara. He refers to it in the first sentence as jnana neri. Jnana neri means the path of jnana. In other words, the jnana marga. That is the Jnana Marga is the path of self-investigation. So what he says in the first sentence is, this is verse 29, Nan endru vayal naviladu, without saying the word I by mouth, ul al manatal, by a mind that is sinking within, nan endru engu undum endru nadale, investigating where is the place from where does I arise? So jnana nariyam, that is the path of jnana. So the meaning of the first sentence is not saying I by mouth, investigating by an inward sinking mind where one rises as I, alone is the path of knowledge. And in this when he says ul al manatal, that's very, very significant, an inward sinking mind. Why is it significant? Because if our attention is fixed on ourselves, by the way, when he says investigating where one rises as I, what's he mean by investigating where we rise? The nature of ego is to rise. Our nature is just to be. So from where does ego rise? It rises from our being. In sleep, what remains in sleep is just our being. In waking or dream, I rise, that ego rises. From where does it rise? It rises only from our being. So investigating where I rises means attending to our own being, attending to that fundamental awareness I am. That's how we investigate where this I rises. And that alone is the path of knowledge. Because by investigating, by attending to our own being, the mind will thereby sink back within. It will subside back within. That's why he says, ullal manatal, by an inward sinking mind. And so there he's defined what is the path of knowledge. So he's implied that is vichara. And then in the next sentence, it's a two-part sentence actually. He first says, instead, thinking not this, I am that, is an aid. Is it vichara? That is, first he concedes it is an aid. But he then asks the rhetorical question, adu vichara mama, is it investigation? The implication is, no, it is not investigation. because it's merely instead of meditating on ourself, our own being, we're meditating on a mere idea about ourself. I am not this, I am that. I'm not this body, I am that Brahman. That's a mere idea we're meditating on. So why does he say it's an aid? Because obviously we have to have, in in order to investigate what we actually are, requires great love. So we need to have a certain degree of conviction. But what we actually are is Brahman, is the infinite whole. Only then will we have sufficient love to pursue this path of self-investigation, to sink within by investigating who am I. So it's an aid to the extent that it gives us some, it help, it's, it's a, when he says it's an aid, it's a very indirect aid. And such aids, and all we need to understand, if we really understand the Mahavakya, I am Brahman, we will naturally be inclined only to find out who am I. Because if I am Brahman, then how can I know Brahman? The only way to know Brahman is to know myself. So merely thinking about the idea of Brahman is not meditating on Brahman. To meditate on Brahman, I need to meditate on I, because there's no Brahman other than I. That should be the understanding. But for those who don't understand that, okay, it may be an aid to think I'm not this, but I'm that. Another verse in which he refers to it as an aid is in verse 36. What he says in verse 36 is, Nam udal endru enin, allam nam adu endru ennamadu, nam aduva nipadaku nal tuneyam. Endrum nam adu endru enuvadu ein. Nan manidan endru ennamo. Nam aduva nikum adnal. What that means is, if we think we're a body, thinking no, we are that, will be a good aid for us to stand as that. Stand as that means to abide as that, to be as that. So it'll remind us, yes, if I am that, then I should stop rising as ego. I should just be as I am by attending to myself. So it's a good aid if we understand the purpose of it. But if we don't understand the purpose of it, of why we are told you are that, it's as Bhagavan says, it's due to lack of strength. So it's a good aid to the extent to which we understand its intention. But as he goes on to say in the second sentence, since we are always that, why thinking we are that? What does one think I am a man? Do we every day when we get up in the morning, do we think to ourselves, I am a man, I am a man, in case we forget it? No, we are so fixed. Man here implies a human being. We are so fixed in this idea, but we're a human being. We don't need to be constantly reminding ourselves I'm a human being. If we are given to imagining that we're a donkey or a monkey, it may be helpful to think, no, I'm not a donkey or monkey, I'm a man. But it's not necessary. If we understand and have that firm conviction that we are human, we're not a donkey or a monkey or a rabbit or a horse or a cow or a dog or a cat or any other creature, we're a man, we're human. Once we understand that, we don't have to go on thinking that. Likewise, if we really understood that we are Brahman, there's no need for us we don't need that aid. We don't need to remind ourselves that we are Brahman. All we need to do is to hold on to self-attentiveness, because that is the implication. When the purpose of the Mahavakya is to turn our attention away from looking for Brahman outside ourselves if we understand that we ourselves are Brahman, we need to investigate and find out who am I. So how to experience ourselves as Brahman? Bhagavan has expressed it beautifully in verse 27 of Ulladu. In the first sentence, he says, Nanu diada ullanilai, namaduvai ullanilai. That means, that is nan udiadu ullanilai. The literal meaning is, I, not rising, being state. In other words, the state in which I is without rising is namaduvai ullanilai, the state in which we are that. So what does Bhagavan mean by this? Does he mean that we are that only when we don't rise as ego? Obviously not, because he says we are always that. So we are always that, but we don't experience ourselves as that. In order to experience ourselves as that, in order to experience ourselves as Brahman, we need to be without rising as ego. So how to be without rising as ego? That he tells us in the next sentence. He says, Nan udikum tanum ade nadamal, nanudia tanirape savadu evan. That means, without investigating the place where I rises, how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. When he says, without investigating the place where I rises, as I explained earlier, the place where I rises, it's not literally a place. It's he used the word place here metaphorically. From where do we rise as ego? We rise from our being. So the place where I rises is our being. That fundamental awareness I am, that is the rising place, the place from which ego rises. So investigating the place where I rises means investigating our own being. So without investigating our being, how to reach the annihilation of ourselves. Reach here means how to achieve that annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. So here when he talks about, he clarifies in the first sentence, he said the state in which I is without rising. He's not just talking about a temporary state like sleep, where in sleep I is without rising. That in sleep we exist without rising as ego, but that's not. He's not referring to a temporary state like that. He's referring to a permanent state. That's why here in the second sentence he clarifies what he means by saying, "Nanudia tan irape." Tan irapu means the annihilation of oneself. Oneself here implies ego. So the annihilation of ego in which I does not rise. In which that is the I that rises is ego. When ego is destroyed, there's no rising of I. And so how to reach that state in which I never rises, the permanent cessation of the rising I, without investigating the place where I rises. So we need to investigate ourselves in order to achieve that annihilation of ourself in which we never again rise as I. And then in the next sentence he says, Saramal tanadu am nilayal nipadu evan. That means without reaching how to stand in one's own state in which oneself is that. When he says without reaching, it implies without reaching the annihilation of ourself. In other words, without achieving the annihilation of ourself, how to stand firmly in our own natural state in which we are that. So the implication is that in order to experience ourselves as that, we need to investigate what we actually are and thereby put an end to the rising of ego. So this is what Bhagavan has taught us. When we, in the light of these teachings of Bhagavan, if we then consider the teaching, this Sri Kant Maharaj and Nisargadatta and such people, they're not the only people who recommend meditating, I am Brahman, I am that, or whatever. This practice has been going on since time immemorial. I mean, for hundreds of years. probably since the time of Shankara and possibly even before the time of Shankara. Was not what Shankara taught, but it was how people understood Shankara. As Bhagavan made clear, the purpose of the Mahavakya is for us to understand that we are Brahman. Having understood that we are Brahman, what we need to do is to investigate who am I, not to go on thinking I am Brahman, I am Brahman. It may be for those people of very poor understanding, those people who suffer, who are devoid of the strength of clear understanding, it may be useful to go on thinking I am Brahman. Like it is often said, people say that Bhagavan recommended for some people recitation of the Ribu Gita. The Ribu Gita is full of repetitions of not just I am Brahman, but saying the same thing in so many different ways. I am infinite consciousness, I'm not this body, so on and so forth. So for certain people who lack the strength, the clarity of understanding, it's maybe useful to go on thinking like that so they get a stronger and stronger conviction. But you're never going to experience yourself as I am Brahman by thinking like that. So Bhagavan never recommend generally for any serious spiritual aspirant, Bhagavan never recommended any of these roundabout methods. Bhagavan said, Bhagavan himself explained, whatever path you may follow, sooner or later you have to come to this path of self-investigation, because other than self-investigation there's no way to put an end, a permanent end to a rising of ego. So this, all other paths, they can best give some purification of mind, but the most effective way to purify the mind is self-investigation. So why to follow all these roundabout paths and uh, and then finally come to this path? Bhagavan said there's an incident that once some villagers had come to Bhagavan's hall, and one of them asked some question about spiritual practice or something, and Bhagavan explained this path of self-investigation. At the time Bhagavan explained that, Kavyaganta Ganapati Sastri happened to be present in the hall. After some time, Bhagavan got up and went out he used to go for a short walk on the foot of the hill, and he used to go there and answer calls of nature also. So Bhagavan went out for his walk. And Kavyaganta turned round to the people who were present in the hall and said, see, Bhagavan recommends this path of self-investigation even to these illiterate villagers. It is even for very learned people like us, this path is very, very difficult. So it's not appropriate to teach this to these illiterate villagers. If he had advised them to come to me, I would have given them a mantra. That's something practical. That's something they could do. So that was his comment. Later, this was reported to Bhagavan that he had said like this. So Bhagavan, in his very simple way, he said, what to do? This is all I know. As if that's all Bhagavan knows. Of course, Bhagavan knows everything, but he said, this is all I know. And then he went on to say, even if we teach some mantra or this or that, sooner or later, they're going to come back and say that they've done this mantra, or they've done this meditation, or they've done this pranayama, or this puja, or japa, or whatever it is, whatever other form of practice you give them. Sooner or later, they're going to come back and say, I've done this, but it didn't work. I still don't know who I am. I'm still dissatisfied. So sooner or later, we have to concede, yes, these other methods are insufficient, and most they can give chitta suddhi, purification of mind, but they cannot, they by themselves, they cannot bring about the annihilation of ego. To bring about the annihilation of ego, the only means is Atma-vichara. So rather than telling people something that you know isn't going to work, And later, when they come back and complain that it hasn't worked, tell them, no, that's not sufficient. You do this right. Why not tell them the correct way from the start? Some people will grasp it. Some people won't grasp it. For those who are not attracted to this path of self-investigation, for those who don't have the clarity of mind to understand that all we need to do is to investigate ourselves, then maybe you have to teach all these other things. And Bhagavan conceded that the same teaching doesn't work for all people. Different teachings have to be given to people according to their level of their pakva, their maturity, spiritual maturity, according to the purity of their mind. But even if you give the highest teaching, as Bhagavan says, according to the purity of the antakarana, the same teaching will reflect in different ways. So even if you give the highest teaching to those who are not ready for it, they're not going to grasp it. So sometimes you do have to give other teachings. That's why he says, meditating I am Brahman, that's also an aid. But it's a very roundabout aid. It's not a, it's, why should we be doing that when we know, if we understand the meaning of Aham Brahmasmi, if we understand the intention behind the Mahavakya, if we understand the implication of that statement, we should investigate who am I. So, but there's so many, just like there's so many different types of spiritual aspirants on so many different, with so many different levels of understanding, there are also gurus at so many different levels. Just because someone has a label of being a guru, being a maharaj or whatever, doesn't mean that that all these titles and so on, these mean nothing. Ultimately, what matters is the true guru, as Bhagavan said, in truth, God and guru are not different. So there's any guru other than God is not a real guru. So there's so many gurus, according to their understanding, they give some teaching. So I'm sure people like Ramakant Maharaj and Nisargadatta Maharaj and so many other thousands of gurus, they're all giving teachings according to their understanding. So of course, there are some frauds out there, but most of them, it doesn't mean all of these other gurus are fraud. That is, there will be frauds in any line, and of course, in the spiritual world, there are lots of frauds. But there are also many so-called gurus who may be very sincere, believing what they're teaching, but they don't have that depth of understanding. For example, saying that but by repeating I am Brahman, you're reviling ego and you're saying you're a liar, you're not male or female, you're Brahman. That is not the purpose of that Mahavakya. The purpose of that Mahavakya is not to revile ego, but to bring our attention to what we actually are. What we actually are is Brahman. So all we need to do is to investigate what we actually are. There's no point reviling ego. Ego isn't going to subside just because we tell it it's a liar, just because. And who is telling ego it's a liar? Ego is telling itself it's a liar. That's not going to work. Ego will subside only to the extent to which we attend to ourselves. So these people like Nisargadatta Maharaj, and I mean generally all of the people in that sampradaya, they have a lot of confused ideas are there because they don't have that clarity, that depth of understanding, because they've never really gone deep into this. Most of them haven't even understood what Atma-vichara is. For example, Nisargadatta says, it's a long time since I read it, and I never read it fully, but many years ago, when I was first in Tiruvannamalai, this I Am That book of Nisargadatta had just come out. And many people were raving about it. Oh, this is just like Bhagavan's teachings, you should read this. So I read a little bit here and there. But he says very confusing things. He says, you should constantly watch yourself, watch the mind, watch the thoughts. What are we to watch? Are we to watch ourselves or to watch the thoughts? The thoughts are not ourselves. The thoughts are objects. So if we think that watching our thoughts is watching ourselves, it's confusing. So many things in that Nisargadatta said were very, very confusing things. But people who didn't have a clear understanding of Bhagavan's teachings thought some of the words looked similar. And of course they were similar because the person who recorded I am that Nisargadatta spoke in Marathi. The person who recorded it in English was Maurice Friedman, who had been with Bhagavan and who was familiar with the English books, the English translations of Bhagavan's teachings in talks. Well, there was no talks in those in the early days, but Maurice Friedman didn't know Tamil. He would have heard Bhagavan's answers being translated by people like Munagala Venkataramaya, who recorded talks. So he would have understood that type of language. He used that type of language when recording Nisargadatta. So there's a certain similarity in the language. But if we go deep into trying to understand what Nisargadatta is saying, so many things are very, very confusing. Sometimes he says, I am is the he talks as if I am is the reality. Sometimes he talks about going beyond I am. How can we possibly go beyond I am? I am means I exist. It's our being. Our very existence is I am. How can we go beyond our being? So many things he says that makes no sense at all. So this isn't any disrespect to these people. They may have been very sincere, they may have believed what they were doing, but there's a lack of clarity there. So we are very fortunate to have come to Bhagavan because Bhagavan gives us so much clarity. He Bhagavan brings out what is the that is many great acharyas before Bhagavan, they became acharyas or they were considered to be acharyas after they wrote commentary on the major Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, and the Bhagavad Gita. This is sometimes said to be the qualification to be an acharya. You have to write learned commentary on these three sets of texts. Bhagavan didn't write any commentaries. But Bhagavan has distilled the essence of all of Vedanta. He's brought out what is the practical implication of Vedanta. For example, in that verse 32 of Gunapadu, where he brings out what is the intention of this Mahavakya, Tattvamasi, you are that. The intention is that we should stop thinking about that and should attend to ourselves, find out what we are. If we know what we are, then we know what that is. We don't have to go on analyzing what is that, what is this, and all these things. So Bhagavan has gone right to the heart of it and brought out the practical implication. And thereby he saved us wasting our time. And in the final analysis, whatever we've done in the past, it all serves a purpose. So Patrick, if you followed this path, it's at least by following this, you've been brought to Bhagavan. So it hasn't gone to waste. But now you don't have to continue with all this roundabout way. If you, having come to Bhagavan, if you understand what he teaches us, all we need to do, in order to know Brahman, we need to know ourselves. And to know ourselves, we need to investigate ourselves. We need to attend to ourselves. It's as simple as that. It's as simple, when I say as simple as that, it is simple. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy for us because we still have very strong Vishaya vasanas. So to overcome our Vishaya vasana means our inclination to attend to Vishayas, our inclination to seek happiness in things other than ourselves. So in order to overcome those vasanas, we need patient and persistent practice for as long as it takes. But as Bhagavan said, knowing oneself is very easy, extremely easy. But though it's easy, it requires dedication because we have to, that there's no obstacle between us and knowing ourselves other than our lack of love to surrender ourselves completely because of we lack that love because of our desires, attachments, likes, dislikes, the seeds of which are what are called Vishaya vasanas. So the practice is necessary. But at least when we come to Bhagavan, we are saved from following all these unnecessary practices. Practices which ultimately are based just on lack of strength or lack of clarity of understanding. When Bhagavan said lack of strength, it means lack of clarity of understanding. So I hope that's a clear and adequate answer to Patrick's question. I don't know if Patrick is here, but if
I am.
I think he's here.
yeah, was my answer clear enough?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. It's very good, Michael.
Right.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's why I've come to Bhagavan, the
Yeah.
clarity. It's
Yeah.
yeah, filled in all the gaps and
Yeah.
yes.
Nothing we've been through in the past is a waste because we had to go through all that for some reason. But
Oh,
having
yes.
come to Bhagavan, so let's not regret anything we've done in the past. But now we've come to Bhagavan, let's make use of this very, very precious opportunity we've been given. Of course,
Yes.
we can't fail to make use of it. Even if we fail, Bhagavan will not leave us. We are now the prey in the jaws of the tiger. But so he will certainly save us, but we have to do our bit. We have to cooperate with him. We have to yield ourselves to his grace by trying more and more to turn within, just to attend
Yeah.
to our mere being.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you, Michael.
Does anyone else have any questions about this?
Okay.
No. Okay.
So the next question we have is from Anand. Arthur Osborne's works, My Life and Quest, Be Still, It's the Wind That Sings, and For Those with Little Dust, deserve renewed attention and recognition for their insight into the progressive development of self-abidance, as emphasized by Sri Sadhu Om, Michael Sir, and others. In My Life and Quest, Osborne appears to have foreseen Bhagavan's path, and in the chapter The Direct Path from those from for those with little dust book, he explicitly outlines it. While his mention of focusing on the right side of the chest may seem like a minor deviation based on contemporary interpretation of Bhagavan's teachings, he does clarify that Bhagavan advised having the direct experience rather than merely feeling in a particular location. Beyond this, Osborne's account aligned closely with Bhagavan's teachings and the perspective of scholars such as Sadhu Om, David Codman, and Michael Sir. For a serious aspirant seeking a comprehensive theoretical and experiential understanding of Ramana Maharishi's teachings, a core set of essential readings would include Who Am I? Along with Michael Sir's latest book through Sandra Dixon, My Life and Quest, Be Still, It's the Wind That Sings, For Those with Little Dust, and Ulladu Narpadu, or as interpreted by Michael James and Sandra Dixon. Is this correct? While not all may have one pointed focus of Sri Sadhu Om and Michael Sir's in resorting to self-abidance, periodically reading above works of Arthur Osborne's interspersed as they are with reminders to abide in being in various ways, helping in motivating one on the path. For those with little dust, also helps bring a perspective on many other issues like free will and predestination, suffering, etc.
Um, what to say? That is, as Bhagavan said, according to the purity of Yantakarana, that's according to the purity of the mind, the same teaching reflects in different ways. So just like Vedanta has been understood and interpreted in so many different ways, Bhagavan's teachings have been understood and interpreted in many different ways. Osborne's understanding never seemed to me, he had a very superficial understanding of Bhagavan's teachings. And to say that his recommendation to focus on the right side of the chest may seem like a minor deviation based on contemporary interpretations. It's got nothing to do with based on that is, it is not a minor deviation. It's a complete misunderstanding. He said self-investigation is to focus the attention on the right side of the chest. The body is an object known by us. The fundamental teaching of Bhagavan is, I am not this body. So how can we know ourselves by meditating on some place in the body? It's a complete misunderstanding. Yes, Bhagavan did mention for a certain reason, Bhagavan mentioned this right-hand side of the chest. That is, Bhagavan often spoke about the heart, and he often clarified that what he meant by the heart is pure awareness, what we actually are. But there were many among Bhagavan's followers who didn't have a deep and subtle understanding, and some of them had studied yoga sastras and mantra sastras and all sorts of other sastras. So they had they didn't have a deep and subtle understanding. So they kept on asking Bhagavan, where in the body is the heart you speak of? Is it the same as the Anahata chakra, the so-called heart chakra? Bhagavan said no. Then where in the body is it? Then Bhagavan said, relative to the body, the place that can be said to be the heart is 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest, because that is where we are though we feel ourselves to be spread throughout the body, where we feel ourself centered, so to speak, is in the chest. When we refer to ourselves, we naturally point to our chest. Bhagavan said it humorously. If you ask a group of school children, who will run and fetch the newspaper? One boy will point his chest, said, I will, sir. He won't point to his feet and said, I'll run and get them. It's the feet that do the running, but he says, I will do it. He points to his chest. If you ask, who knows the answer to this, who can answer this mathematical problem? And another boy will say, I can, sir. Then he'll again point to his chest. He doesn't point to his head and say, oh, I can work it out, sir. He points to his chest because we naturally feel ourselves centered in the body. And we can all observe this. If, for example, you suddenly have a shock, supposing you're walking down the street and suddenly a car horn behind you suddenly honks the horn loudly and you get a bit of a shock, you can feel a sensation in that part of the chest. So that is where we seem to be centered in this body, but that is not the center of ourself. That is the center where that is the I that is identified with this body is ego, and that ego is that we can say that is the center, ego's location in the body, the center, ego's central location in the body. Though ego seems to be spread throughout the body, somehow it's centered there. That's all. It has no more significance than that. And because people question, oh, how can you say this is not written like this in any sastra? Bhagavan happened to come across in a Malayalam translation of an Ayurvedic text called Ashtanga Hridayam. Ashtanga, that is like yoga, but it has 8 limbs. There were said to be 8 limbs of Ayurveda. And so Ashtanga Hridaya means the heart of the 8 limbs. So it's one of the classic books on Ayurvedic medicine. In a Malayalam translation of that, Bhagavan came across 2 verses that referred to the heart on the right-hand side. So for for the sake of those who were interested in such things, he translated them. But if we these are verses 18 and 19 in Upadeshundya. Sorry, I mean in Uludunapdu Anubandham, verse 18 and 19. If you read the verses, they describe it as they describe the heart as a closed bud, a downward facing bud. This is the classic description of the heart. Oh, sorry, of heart in the sense of ego. Not, because the term heart is used in many different senses. So the ego, which is is sometimes likened to a lotus bud, but is closed. And that lotus bud has to open, it has to blossom. So it's the description of it there is as a closed flower bud in which darkness and everything abides. So it's a metaphorical description of ego. It is not heart in the deepest sense of the term. In the same Uludunapdu Anubandham, after a couple of verses, Bhagavan then gives some verses that he translated from Yoga Vashista, in which Rama asked Vashista, what is that real heart, which is said to be the mirror in which the whole universe appears? And Vashista replies, the heart is of two kinds. One is to be accepted, one is to be rejected. The heart that is to be rejected is an organ in this fleshy body. That's not the heart we're concerned about. The real heart, the spiritual heart, whose nature is pure awareness, is that in which everything appears. So it's very clear. Though Bhagavan translated those verses, he also translated other verses to make it clear that that is not the real meaning of the word heart. The thing with heart simply means center. So it's used, we use the term heart in so many different ways. Of course, sometimes it's used to refer to the physical organ that pumps blood, but we use heart in so many other ways. He set his heart upon it. That means he really wants it. Or we talk about a person being, when someone is bereaved, when they lose their loved one, they talk about them being broken-hearted. And just like that, we use the term heart in so many ways. We use the term heart to refer to the emotions and so many things. But the spiritual heart, the heart Bhagavan is talking about, is the ultimate center, the center of all centers. That is what we really are. That has got nothing to do with this physical body. So the fact that Osborne didn't even understand what is the practice of self-investigation, that means he lacked that subtlety of understanding. So there may be some nice things in his book. It's a long time since I've read anything that he's written, because I was not ever interested in anything that did not seem to me to represent the pure teachings of Bhagavan. So some people may find Arthur Osborne's books useful, that's fine. But just like, as I said, just like in Vedanta, there's so many different interpretations of Vedanta. There's Advaita, there's Vishishta Dvaita, there's Dvaita, there's Beda, Achintya Beda, Suddha Dvaita, Dvaita, so many different interpretations. All these different interpretations are according to the different purity of mind. Even in Advaita, there's so many different understandings. So it's everyone finds their own level. So for some people, Osborne's books may be useful, I don't know. But I think for anyone who wants to go deep into Bhagavan's teachings, Osborne's books will not be found so useful. I certainly wouldn't classify them as a core work of Bhagavan and class them along with works like Nana, Who Am I, or Uludunapadu. That is the The core set of essential reading are Bhagavan's own writings. That is Arunachal Stuti Panchakam, Upadeshundya, Uladunapadu, Ekama Panchakam, Anma Vidya, Apalapatu, Upadesha Tanipakal, and Nana. These are the core teachings of Bhagavan. If we want to understand these very well, Sadhu Om's commentaries and Sadhu Om's explanations are extremely useful because he makes it very, very clear what Bhagavan, the intention of Bhagavan teaching. And of course, Guru Vasha Kavai is a very important work because Murugan recorded so many teachings of Bhagavan in Guru Vasha Kavai. And that's one recording that we can rely upon because Murugan was so well attuned to Bhagavan. But the writings of Osborne, it's his own. I mean, it may be useful for some people, but it's not. I certainly don't think. I think it's something that it's not something I would recommend to anyone, and it's certainly not essential reading for anyone wanting to follow Bhagavan's path. With all due respect to Arthur Osborne, he was a good devotee. He had devotion to Bhagavan, like so many people had devotion to Bhagavan. But many people had good devotion to Bhagavan, but they didn't have that that clarity of understanding. They failed to understand or they may have understood at a certain level in their own way, but they lacked a deep and subtle understanding. So, as I say, all this I say with no disrespect to Arthur Osborne or to any other devotee. Everyone is at their own level. So, sometimes people argue about what is the correct interpretation of Vedanta. Some people say, no, Vishista Dvaita is correct, Dvaita is correct, Dvaita is correct, this is correct. It's not like that. The truth is, all Vedanta is intended to be interpreted in different ways to suit the needs of different people. So we can't say one interpretation is correct, other interpretations are wrong. All we can say is some interpretations are deeper and therefore more useful for the true spiritual aspirant. The deepest of all the interpretations is Advaita, and the deepest form of Advaita is Bhagavan's teachings. All the other interpretations, they're all suited to people at different levels, which is fine. For the majority of people, Bhagavan's teachings are too deep and too subtle. So there are so many other things provided for them. And even Bhagavan, when people asked him questions, he didn't always answer in accordance with his own teachings, his core teaching. He would often give answers that were suited to the understanding of those people, suited to the level of development of those people. So there are many good devotees of Bhagavan who, though they've got genuine devotion to Bhagavan, they don't really have much understanding of his teachings, which is fine. I mean, Bhagavan will take care of everyone. We need not be concerned about others. But when it comes to recommending for someone who is seriously wants to follow Bhagavan's teachings, I wouldn't be able to recommend most of the books that people say are wonderful books on Bhagavan teaching because they're really not bringing out the depth and clarity of Bhagavan's teachings. I don't know if Anand is here, but I hope that is a satisfactory answer to his question.
Yes, thank you, Michael. We have one more question from Anand. It appears that the collective inner tendencies of all the beings create a grand narrative.
Sorry, there was one other thing I wanted to say about this heart on the right-hand side. Heart, in the sense Bhagavan used it, heart means ourself. And because of this misunderstanding that people started jump to a wrong conclusion that because Bhagavan mentioned the heart on the right-hand side of the chest, but meditating on that is meditating on oneself to clarify but that is not his intention. But one of the last original work that Bhagavan wrote was Ekama Panchakam. And in verse 3 of Ekama Panchakam, what he says is, Tannul tan iruka, when the body is within oneself, tan at jada udalam, tannul irupada, tan unnam Anna-avan Chitratin ulladu at Chitratiku Adara Vastiram Endru Enuvan. What that means is when the body is within oneself, anyone who thinks that oneself is only within that insentient body is someone who thinks that the cloth, which is the support for the picture, exists within that picture. That is, if we go to a cinema, the cinema is the cloth he's referring to here is the screen, the cinema screen. So the picture is projected on the screen. If you think the screen is within the picture, how foolish that would be. Equally foolish is to think that oneself is in some place within the body. The whole body, the whole universe, the whole picture, all phenomena exist only, they're all a projection on that screen of pure awareness. So that pure awareness, that is the real heart, not any point in the body. So Bhagavan wrote this verse particularly for this purpose, to make it clear that though he doesn't mention the word heart here, that is the clear implication. We shouldn't think that the heart is something within the body. The entire picture is contained within the heart, because the heart is the infinite space of pure awareness in which ego rises, and it's only in the view of ego that the body and world and everything else exist. Sorry to interrupt you, but that was something I thought of saying and then I forgot about it.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. So the next question is also from Anand. It appears that the collective inner tendencies of all beings create a grand narrative, much like a movie, in which various characters play their roles. One might say that this entire play is permeated by consciousness, unfolding according to a predetermined sequence of cause and effect, leaving the only true freedom in turning inward. This marks the first stage of Maya experience. The second stage occurs when we identify with the character that our ignorance has fashioned within this movie, leading to suffering. We mistakenly believe that our suffering is caused by another character, when in reality, we are merely enacting a predetermined script, simply experiencing rather than being autonomous agents. For example, in the case of a murder, both the murderer and the victim are ultimately Brahman. If we take on the role of the victim, we are no more real than the perpetrator, as both are part of the same illusion. However, this entire movie-like experience exists only within Brahman, and in reality, it is merely a reflection in the individual mind. To that extent, it is our own dream. If ignorance were absent, our script would not have been part of the larger script, and we would not be experiencing the role of a particular character in this illusory play. Does this perspective accurately describe the nature of our experience?
No, it doesn't. Well, it's not describing what Bhagavan has taught us. That is what Bhagavan never said, but this world is created by the collective inner tendencies of all beings. He said this world is nothing but a dream. So it exists only in the view of the dreamer. And it is a projection of the dreamer's inner tendencies. That is the Vishaya vasanas of the dreamer. The dreamer is ego. So it's not anyone else's vasanas, it's our own vasanas that we are seeing projected as all this world. It is also not correct to say, but we're merely enacting a predetermined script, simply experiencing rather than being autonomous agents. This again is a seeming denial of freedom of will, which is not in accordance with Bhagavan's teaching. What is predetermined is our prarabdha. Prarabdha is the fruit of our past karmas, but it will be given to experience in this lifetime. So whatever we are given to experience is predetermined. But it doesn't mean all our actions are predetermined. Certain actions that in order to experience what is predetermined, in other words, our prarabdha, certain actions may be necessary on our part. For example, if it's our prarabdha to be a doctor, we have to study, we have to pass the exams and everything. So those actions of studying and passing the exams, those are actions we will be made to do by God in accordance with our prarabdha, as Bhagavan clearly indicated in the first sentence of the note he wrote for his mother. Avarava prarabdha prakaram adakanavan angangirandu atavipan. That means, in accordance with the prarabdha of each one, Adakanava means he who is for that. That's referring to God or Guru, the ordainer of the one who allots the fruit of karmas. Angangirandu means being there, being in each place, implying being in the heart of each one of us. Artavipan means will cause to dance. In other words, he will make us act in accordance with our prarabdha. This does not mean that all our actions are actions that we do in accordance with prarabdha, because our actions are driven not only by God in accordance with our prarabdha, they're also driven by us in accordance with our will. So those actions we do under the sway of our vasanas, in other words, the actions we do in accordance with our will, are what are called agamya. And it's the fruit of agamya, but what we are now experiencing as prarabdha is the fruit of agamya that we've done in previous lives. So if we were not autonomous agents, that is, if we didn't have the freedom to act or not to act in accordance with our vasanas, we wouldn't be the doers, and therefore we wouldn't have to experience the resulting fruit. As Bhagavan says in verse 38 of Uludnaptu, if we have a doer of actions, Vinay Mudal Namayin, if we have a doer of actions, Vile Payan Tuipom, we will experience the resulting fruit. So the fact that we are now experiencing the fruit of past actions means we were the doer of those actions. The doer means we were acting in accordance with our freedom of will. Our freedom of will and action, to be more precise, Icha Kriya Swatantra, as Bhagavan used to say. So to say that everything is predetermined is to misunderstand Bhagavan's teachings. This is a mistake many people have made, but it's because of a lack of deep understanding of Bhagavan teaching. Take the note he wrote for his mother. After saying that in accordance with the prarabdha of each one, he who is for that will make them act. He then goes on to say, Endrum naduvadadu, envechikanum naduvadu. That means whatever is not to happen, whatever is never to happen will not happen in spite of any amount of effort. When he says envechikanum, in spite of any amount of effort, what that implies is that we have the freedom to want to experience what is not we're not destined to experience, and we have the freedom to try to experience it. But however much we want to experience it and try to experience it, we cannot experience it because it's not part of prarabdha. And then in the next sentence, he says the the same thing the other way around. Nadabadu entade seyanum niladu. What is to happen will not stop in spite of any amount of obstacle. So if we are destined to experience something, we are free to want not to experience it. And we are free to try to avoid experiencing it, but we are not free to avoid experiencing it because it's going to happen whether we like it or not. Iduve tinnam, this is certain. Ahalin monamai irake nandru. Therefore, being silent is good. What does he mean by being silent? Does he mean we should give up all action? Obviously not, because whatever actions we need to do in accordance with prarabdha will be made to do. What he means by being silent is not rising as ego, subsiding back within by turning our attention within, holding on to our being, and thereby subsiding back into the heart. Then if we are not rising as ego, we will not be acting in accordance with our vasanas. And therefore, whatever actions are done by mind, speech, or body are actions that God is making that mind, speech, and body to do. We will not identify with those. So to say that Bhagavan, in some books it's recorded, but Bhagavan said everything is predetermined. But we don't know the exact words Bhagavan said, but what he meant by that is everything that we are to experience is predetermined. He didn't, but if everything were predetermined, then there'd be no scope for agamya. So this is related to something else that Anand wrote. He said, the only freedom is turning within. That is the only correct use. We have freedom. The only correct use of our freedom is to turn within. Because so long as we allow our attention to continue going outwards, we are misusing our freedom and doing agamya. So if we want to avoid doing agamya, if we want to avoid misusing our freedom, we need to turn within. But if we choose to not turn within, if we refuse to go out, then we have freedom, because as Bhagavan clarified, vasanas rise in countless numbers like ocean waves. That is, vasanas are constantly rising in our mind. We have inclinations to do this, to do that, and often we have contrary inclinations. For example, if we've just eaten a very tasty meal, we may feel inclined to eat a little bit more because it's so tasty. But at the same time, we know if we eat more, then it's going to be too much for us. We're not going to feel very well. So we've got an inclination to eat more and an inclination to avoid eating more. We have the freedom either to eat more or not. We have that freedom to follow this vasana or that vasana. But the wisest thing to do is to be swayed only by the sat vasana, by clinging to self-attentiveness. Clinging to self-attentiveness is being swayed by sat vasana. Attending to anything other than ourself is being swayed by vishaya vasanas. So we have that freedom of choice. And when it comes to being swayed by vishaya vasanas, we've got so much choice. We can be swayed by this vasana or that vasana. We have that choice moment to moment. That is why we're constantly doing agamya and thereby creating more fruit. That's why the sanchita is such a vast heap. And from that vast heap, God selects those fruit that will be most beneficial to us turning within. I could analyze more and more of what he said, but I think it's really generally what he said is rather confused, so we need not go into it in more detail.
Thank you, Michael. So the next question we have is from Swega. Swega, do you want to read your question?
Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you, Michael. My question is about the process of self-investigation. From
Yeah.
my understanding, we need to turn our attention within and ask, who am I? And to see to whom the question appears and to catch hold of the self to whom it appears. However, sometimes I get confused about whether I'm attending to my mind or to myself. Would the occasional peace I experience be a sign that I'm attending to the self?
Firstly, it's not necessary to ask, who am I? Bhagavan didn't say, ask, who am I? Though it's recorded like that in some English books. What Bhagavan actually said is, investigate, who am I? And what he means by investigation, as he says in Nana, Sada kalmum manate atma-vilve tirupatikutan Atma-vichara mendrupaya. That means the name Atma-vichara is only for always keeping our mind on ourselves. So the aim in Atma-vichara is to keep our mind on ourselves. In other words, to fix our attention on ourselves. Whether we're attending to ourself or our mind, we first need to understand what we mean by mind. Because the term mind is a term that is used in different senses in different contexts. As Bhagavan says in verse 18 of Upadesha Undiyar, he starts by saying, Enangale manam, thoughts alone are the mind. So, in other words, what that implies is mind is a collective term for the totality of all thoughts. But he then goes on to say, of all those thoughts, the root thought is the thought called I. What he means by the thought called I is ego. Why is it the root thought? Because all other thoughts are objects. The knower of all other thoughts is the subject, that is ego. So the thought called I is the only thought that is endowed with awareness. So all other thoughts exist only in the view of this first thought, I. So what the mind essentially is this thought I. That's what he concludes in that verse. I've paraphrased it. I've not given it exactly as he's given it, but that is the implication. So when we talk about the mind, that is the same word mind is used in different contexts. If we're referring to other thoughts, those other thoughts are objects. They're jada, devoid of awareness. If we're talking about the first thought I, it's the only thought that that is endowed with awareness. It is what is called chit jada granti. That is, it's the not caused by the entanglement of chit and jada. So it has that element, that chit element in it. That chit element of ego is what we actually are. That is, there is only one I. That one I, in its pure condition, is Brahman, is what we actually are. That same I, mixed and conflated with adjuncts, with upadhis. Adjunct is not an entirely adequate term for a translation of upadhi. There's no exact equivalent, but upadhi means something that is what we mistake ourselves to be. Those are upadhis. So if you, for example, if you've got a classic example that is given is if you've got a glass of water, it's clear water, but if you're behind the glass of water, if you put a red rose, the water looks red. So that redness is an upadhi. It's something that is superimposed upon that. So the water seems to be red, though it's not actually red. So we seem to be this body and mind. So the body and mind are upadhi. So it's in that sense I'm using the word adjunct. So these adjuncts, when I mixed and conflated with adjuncts, is what is called ego. So there are not two I's. That is the pure I and the impure I. It's the same I, either in a pure condition or in an adjunct conflated condition. So if when you say mind, where you're attending to the mind, if you mean attending to anything, any thoughts, anything other than I, then that is not self-investigation. So long as you're attending to I, that is self-investigation. Naturally, but self-investigation is done by ego. So we start off mixed and conflated with adjuncts. But the more we hold on to to our own being, the more the adjuncts will drop off and the pure I alone will remain. So what we need to clear, if we have a doubt about whether we're doing this correctly, we need to think more deeply, more carefully about Bhagavan's teachings, because this is a very, very simple practice that Bhagavan has given us. In fact, it couldn't be simpler, because it's not any other practice, any meditation. There are two things. There's a meditator and the thing that is meditated on. But in this case, there are no two things. There's only one thing, because that which is meditating and that which is meditated on are one and the same thing. That is, we are meditating on ourselves. So it's if we need to read Bhagavan's teachings carefully, understand clearly. If we understand his teachings clearly, we will clearly understand what the practice is. If we haven't understood the practice correctly, we haven't understood the teachings correctly. So we need to think more carefully about them. Of course, when we start off, our understanding is not very deep or very clear. But we need to have a certain amount of understanding in order to start. Because if we are confusing, for example, if we still take ourselves to be this body or mind, I mean, if we still believe that we have this body and mind, if we're told to attend to ourselves, we'll attend to a body or attend to a mind. Attend to mind means in the sense of other thoughts. So we need to clearly understand that what we are is not any object, not any phenomenon, not anything that appears or disappears. We are that background awareness, that fundamental awareness I am, that which is constant, that which never appears or disappears, that is ever shining. So if we have a clear understanding of what it is we have to attend to, namely ourselves, then we won't have any doubt about it. Yes, sometimes, of course, during the course of practice, our attention keeps on getting diverted away from ourselves. But we need to bring it back to ourselves. This Bhagavan didn't actually ask us to question to whom. He said investigate to whom. This is a very powerful clue Bhagavan has given us, because whenever our attention is diverted away from ourselves towards other things, those other things appear in our awareness. So to whom do they appear? Well, this isn't asking the question, but but just for understanding's sake, I'm saying, to whom do they appear? Obviously, they appear to us. So what he means by investigating to whom is turning our attention away from whatever appears back towards ourselves, the one to whom it appears. So that's a very, very powerful clue, because nothing could appear. I mean, whatever appears only in our view. So it's without our presence, nothing would appear. So whatever appears should remind us, to whom does it appear? To me. Who am I? That's not asking the question. I'm just showing how our attention should turn back towards ourselves. And having turned our attention back towards ourselves, we should then try to hold on to that self-attentiveness. Is that a clear answer, or?
Yes, it makes more sense. I'll try reflecting on it more. I have a follow-up.
Yes.
When we are doing duties and responsibilities in the world outside that needs to be done, and at the same time, I try to keep my attention to whom all of this happens.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what happens is the mind naturally needs to be extended outward to perform the responsibilities. So, how to keep a balance of trying to be in the world, but also still attending to ourselves? Or I'm just wondering if it is possible at all to keep a balance in
Right.
this.
Okay. When we start off, it seems that we have so many responsibilities, and that without our attention, these things would not go on. That is, we've got work to do, we've got things to attend to. But actually, as Bhagavan makes clear, in the 13th paragraph of Nana, this is a very, very important paragraph. What he says in that paragraph is, he first defines what he means by self-attention, by self-surrender. What is self-surrender? What does it mean to give oneself to God? He explains, Anma chintane tabira, vera chintane kalambavataku, satram idam kodamal, atmanishta paranai iripade, tanne isanuku alipadam. That means, Atmanishta paranai iripade means being as Atmanishta paran. Atmanishta paran means one who is firmly fixed as oneself. In other words, being as we actually are is giving ourselves to God. But how to be as we actually are, he makes clear in the first clause. In the first clause means without giving the slightest room to the rising of any other thought except Atmachintana. Atmachintana literally means self-thought or thought of oneself, but what it implies is self-attentiveness. So what he implies by this clause is we need to be so keenly self-attentive, but we don't give room to rising of any other thought. Any thought, we shouldn't attend to anything other than ourselves. By being so keenly self-attentive, we as ego thereby subside and we remain as we actually are. That's what he means by Nishta Paranayiripate. Since we have subsided back into the source from which we rose, that is giving ourselves to God. So this is our aim. It may seem that we're very far from achieving this, but this is what we are working towards. This is how we surrender ourselves to God. Only by means of however much we try to surrender ourselves by other means, the surrender can become complete only by means of self-investigation, as Bhagavan makes clear here. But I have so many responsibilities. How can I spend all my time attending only to myself and not attending to all my responsibilities? Bhagavan has an answer for that in the next sentence. Isam peril evelo bharate patalum avalaveum avavahitu kol kira. That means however much burden we place on God, he will bear all of it. So even the burden of thinking and of doing our work, and leave all that burden to him. He will bear it all. And then he clarifies this in the next sentence. He says, well, I'll first read the first clause, just because that's very, very important, and then I'll read the whole sentence. Sakala Karingalayum oru Parameshwara Shakti Nadati Kol Nati Kondirukira Padiyal. That means, since the one Parameshwara Shakti, the supreme power or the power of the Supreme Lord, or the supreme power of the Lord, is driving all karyas. What's he mean by Sakala Karya, or all karyas? Karyas means what ought to happen or what needs to happen, or what needs to be done or what ought to be done. So whatever we need to do, he's making us do. Whatever needs to happen, he's making it all happen. So when he alone is making everything happen as it's meant to happen, that is the implication. When such is the case, namum adaku adangi ramal ipadisaya vendum apadisaya vendum ein sada chinpadain. That means when he's driving all karyas, making everything happen as it's meant to happen, why should we, instead of yielding ourselves to it, be constantly thinking it's necessary to do like this, it's necessary to do like that? The implication is that if we leave everything to him, if we focus on self-attentiveness, he will take care of everything else. Even if we don't focus on self-attentiveness, he's anyway taking care of everything. Everything is happening in accordance with his will. That is, his grace is driving the whole everything is happening as it's meant to happen. So we can happily leave everything to him. And to make this, to drive home this point, in the last sentence, he gives this example, which is familiar, I think it should be familiar to all of us, of the passenger traveling on the train. When we're traveling on the train is carrying all the burden, is carrying us and all our luggage and so many other things. So when we're traveling on the train, why should we suffer carrying our luggage on our head instead of putting it aside and traveling comfortably? He says it very beautifully. Puhe vandi sakala barangalayum tangi kondu povadu terindum. Though we know that this train, this puhe vandi, the smoky carriage, as he calls it, is bearing all the burden. Why adil eri kondu pohum nam? We who are traveling in it, namadaya siria muteyeum, adil potu vitu sukumai iramal. Instead of happily leaving it all our luggage aside on that train, that's carrying all the burden, ade namadu talayil tangi kondu ein kashta padavendum. Why should we suffer? Why should we undergo difficulty carrying it on our head? So we have a choice. Either we leave the entire burden to him and travel happily, or we suffer by carrying it on our head. So when he's bearing all the burden, we don't have to worry for everything. Whatever duties or responsibilities we may have, that is who has their responsibilities, the person we seem to be. If we surrender ourselves to him, he will make this person do whatever it's meant to do. Even if we don't surrender to him, he will still make us do whatever we're meant to do. So, though at first it seems necessary to us, but we think about our responsibilities and put our attention on all these things, if we follow this path, as we go deeper and deeper in this path, we will find more and more that everything is happening as it's meant to happen. We don't actually have to do anything. Our only responsibility is to hold on to him in our heart. In other words, to fix our attention firmly on ourselves. If that is not clear to us at first, doesn't matter. Try to practice as much as you can, and this will slowly become clearer and clearer. But this is a very great assurance Bhagavan gives us in this paragraph. We can happily leave all our burden, even the burden of thinking, leave it to him. He will take care of everything.
Michael, thanks for answering. I have a follow-up as well. It's going to sound a little naive, but I'm going to put it out.
Okay.
If say I surrender to self and it takes care of everything that has to happen, everything that has to happen is supposed to happen to me through this body. So how do I know that self will do everything to take care of everything that is supposed to happen through me? Is it going to instruct me from within? I'm just a little confused of how to make sense of it.
That is, self is not something other than yourself. It's not one, there are not two selves, one self instructing another self. That is, Bhagavan has given us an assurance in this paragraph and in so many other ways. But whatever is happening as it's meant to happen. It's all happening by that one Parameshwara Shakti. If we clearly understand that, we don't have to worry about anything. All we have to do is to hold on to self-attentiveness and subside within. Everything else will happen as it's meant to happen. Whether we surrender ourselves or not, what is going to happen is going to happen. What is not going to happen is not going to happen, as he makes so clear in that note he wrote for his mother. So we really don't have to worry about anything. It's because of our lack of clear understanding and real conviction that we are concerning ourselves with all these things. But let's not worry about these things. What is not clear to us now will become clear to us to the extent to which we follow this practice of trying to turn within and hold on to the self-attentiveness as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Do you
We
have
have a
any?
few more questions lined up, Michael. Do you want
Yes.
to take one more question, or
Oh,
is
oh
it's
yes,
already
yeah,
two?
yes. Sorry, I
Okay.
spent a long time on these
No,
old
no problem.
questions.
That's okay. Yeah. Sveka, you have sent a question via email. Do you want to ask that, or you want me to read it for you?
Yeah, it would be better if you could read it. I
Sure.
don't know
Yeah.
if that question is quite relevant, but yeah, anyways.
Okay. So the question is, if the ultimate unreal ego, through the light of the self, is dreaming this world and the physical body, I wonder, how does the ego have such power to imagine a universe so vast, with its countless galaxies, immense diversity of physical forms, and the sheer mass of observable universe, often quoted as 10 to the power of 53 kgs? According to my understanding of Bhagavan's teachings, this physical universe is an illusion. But then, how is this illusion so incredibly massive, orderly, and seemingly governed by precise physical laws, as explained by Newton, quantum physicists, and others? We have even managed to use these laws to build vehicles, airplanes, long distance communication systems, and much more. So when we discover a physical law, is it the self shining light on the ego, allowing it to perceive and interact with the illusory physical world? I would deeply appreciate any insight or comments you can provide.
That is physical laws. When we observe this world, we can observe certain the physical world seems to behave in certain ways. Take a simple physical law, the law of gravity. We know that if we drop something, it falls down. Why does it fall down? We understand that it's because of the attraction that material things have for each other. So though the object we drop may be something light, like a mobile phone or something, the Earth is a very massive thing. So the attraction is there. So we have observed these things and we say this is a physical law. In a dream also, generally in dream, we observe the same physical laws. Of course, there are some dreams where we find we can fly, but as a general rule in dreams, we find the same physical laws seem to be applying. For example, if we find ourselves on the edge of a precipice or in some place, and we fear falling over it, because if we fall, we fear we're going to go down very fast to the ground and hit the ground with it and injure ourselves. So the same physical laws that seem to apply in this waking state also seem to apply in dream. But do the physical laws in dream, it's all just, the dream is entirely a mental fabrication. And according to Bhagavan, this waking world is exactly the same. It's just a dream. So the sheer mass of the observable universe, this is just a thought in the dream. It's just an idea. Everything that we observe, it's all a mental fabrication. As Bhagavan says, for example, in the sixth verse of Ulladunnapadu, he says, the world is nothing but the five kinds of sense impression, nothing else. There, Andrew. The five kinds of sense impression means sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and tactile sensations. If you take away these, where is there any world? And these these sense impressions are actually nothing but mental impressions. That is, the eyes and ears don't know anything. It's we, that is, the sights and sounds and tastes and smells and tactile sensations are known to whom? To me. So they're all just mental impressions. It's just as Bhagavan said, it's just like a picture on a screen. The fact that that picture on the screen is behaving in a certain way doesn't mean make it any less a picture. So if we are looking outwards and if we take all this to be real, it all seems very vast and very 10 to the power of 53 kilos and all these wonderful laws that have been discovered and all these things. But if it's all just a dream, what meaning does any of these have? Once someone asked Bhagavan whether he agrees with Darwin's theory of evolution. Bhagavan smiled and said, in a dream, if you see a big building and you wonder who has built this, where did all the materials come from? How were all these materials procured? How many people built this? You can go and do research. And you can, maybe you can read about the history of the building. You find the stones are coming from such and such a place, and the cement is coming from such and such a place, and the wood is coming from somewhere else, and that so many people built it, and it took so many years and everything. So long as you're dreaming, all that will seem very real. But when you wake up, you realize it was all just a mental fabrication. So as long as we take this world to be real, all this science, the laws of physics, the so-called evolution, and all these things, all these seem to be very real. But they're no more real than the seer of them. And the seer of them is ego. And if we investigate this ego, we'll find this ego is unreal. That is, ego is not entirely unreal. Just like if you see a rope, mistake it to be a snake, the snake is not entirely unreal. It's unreal as a snake, but it's real as a rope. Likewise, ego is unreal as ego. It's real as pure awareness. So what actually exists is only that satchit, that pure being awareness, which is what we actually are. Everything else is just a manokarpana, a mental fabrication. So however vast and wonderful it all seems to be, it's actually nothing but a dream, a mental fabrication. So we need to decide what we take to be real. So long as we take ourselves to be this body, the world will seem to be real. Just like so long as we're dreaming, the dream world seems to be real. Why does the dream world seem to be real so long as we're dreaming? Because so long as we're dreaming, we experience the dream body as I. What is actually real is only I. So if that dream body is I, then the dream body is real. But the dream body is just a small part of that vast dream universe. So the whole dream universe seems to be real. All the 10 to the power of 53 mass and whatever else, so all these wonderful galaxies and everything, they're all there in the dream as thoughts, just like they're here in the waking state as thoughts. So, so long as we're dreaming, because of our identification with the dream body seems to be real, and hence the whole dream world seems to be real. But as soon as we wake up, that is, as soon as we leave that dream and come to this dream, our identification switches from identification with that dream body to identification with this dream body. As soon as our identification with the dream body is severed, we recognize, oh, it was all just a dream. It was all just a mental fabrication. What a moment before seemed to be so real is immediately recognized as a fabrication as soon as our identification with that dream body ends. So just like that dream body and dream world seem to be real, because the dream body seemed to be I, the same with this world. Because this world seems to be, because this body seems to be I, this body, I alone is real. Because this body seems to be I, the body seems to be real. And if this body is real, the whole world must be real. You can't have just a real body in an unreal world. Obviously, the whole world of which that body is a small part also seems to be real. So what is happening, whether in waking or in dream, we are superimposing our own reality onto the body. So the body seems to be real, and thereby we're superimposing it on the world, so the world seems to be real. What actually is real is only ourself. Because what is common to both waking and dream? It's I. The same I that was then experiencing a dream and is now experiencing this, it's the same I. And even in the absence of any body or any world, the same I continues to shine in sleep. So that alone is what is real. We alone are real. Everything else is unreal. Is that a clear answer?
Yes, it is. So we are saying that this whole endeavor of science that sort of promises to know the world and all that, it
Yeah.
happens in the limited framework of the dream itself.
Yeah.
So for the ultimate answer, I have to turn to myself, because that's all. Yeah.
Exactly. That is, as far as the laws of physics, for example, we can't defy the laws of physics so long as we take ourselves to be a body. We can't jump off a tall building and think that we can float gently down to earth. We know if we jump from a tall building, we're going to fall and injure ourselves. So long as we seem to be identified with this body, all this seems to be real. So all the science, for example, the science of climate change, we all know that climate change is taking place and it's caused by human activity, and the more we continue burning fossil fuels, the more the planet is going to heat up, and the more weather patterns are going to be disturbed, and there's going to be drought, and there's going to be floods, and there's going to be forest fires, and all these consequences. This is all true. As true as I am this body, all this is true. But am I this body? That is what we have to question. All this is based upon who knows all these things, who knows all the science, who knows all the history, who knows all the geography, who knows all the religion and the arts and all these things. It's all known to I. So if our knowledge of I, if there's a defect in our knowledge of I, whatever knowledge is based upon this defective knowledge will also be defective. So if I'm this body, yes, all this is true, but am I this body? That is what we need to investigate. Bhagavan has explained to us, and not only Bhagavan, it's also explained in Vedanta, but why we cannot be this body. We cannot be anything in the absence of which we exist. We seem to be this body in the waking state. In dream, we seem to be some other body. So in dream, we're aware of ourselves without being aware of this body. Now we're aware of ourselves without being aware of that dream body. So neither of these bodies can be I. What about the mind? It's the same mind in waking or dream. So is the mind I? No, because in sleep, we're aware I am, but we're not aware of the mind. So whatever we can exist in the absence of cannot be what we actually are. So our identification, our deeply rooted identification. I am this body, I am this mind. Body, actually the term body includes the mind. As Bhagavan said, the body is a form of five sheaths. So when we talk about body, we're talking about the whole bundle of five sheaths. The physical body, the prana or life, the manamaya kosha or mind, the vijnanamaya kosha or intellect, and the anandamaya kosha or will. All these five make up the body that we seem to be. None of these things are what we actually are, because we exist in the absence of all of them in sleep. So clearly our knowledge of ourself is a mistaken knowledge. We have a false awareness of ourself. And all our awareness of other things is based upon this false awareness. So how can we be sure of any knowledge that we have when our knowledge of ourself is clearly a defective knowledge? It's a false knowledge we have of ourselves. So before we can know any other thing, we first need to know what we are. And according to Bhagavan, if we know what we are, there'll be nothing else for us to know, because we alone are what actually exists. Is that clear?
Yes, yes, this has brought more clarity. Thank you.
That is Bhagavan's teaching, giving us a radically different view on all these things. They're making us, Bhagavan is challenging us to question our most fundamental assumptions. All our assumptions about this world are these assumptions about ourselves. Everything Bhagavan is asking is challenging us to question. Let's not take any of these things for granted. We cannot be said to know anything correctly when we don't even know ourselves. So the most important thing is to first know ourselves. Then let us worry about the world, whether the world is real or not. If there's a world to worry about. But if this world is just a dream, it will all dissolve along with the dreamer, namely ego. And what will remain is what we actually are. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.
Thank you all for attending today. Namo Ramanaya.